everyone. Welcome to the MAPS Canada webinar series, Examining the Psychedelic Renaissance, Season 2. My name is Reverend Shannon Smedella, and I'm your host for the series. We are very happy to let you know that this episode of the series is brought to you by Enhanced Therapy Institute. You'll be able to find the link in the comments, and we will hear from one of their representatives in our closing today. We are beyond excited to bring to you Season 2 as we had an extremely potent and successful Season 1 full of amazing speakers, researchers, and of course, attendees like you. As you can see, we've expanded our speakers for this season to include over 25 doctors, researchers, luminaries, ministers, shamans, elders, activists, and much more. Each of these speakers and panels will be showing up to share important information and their take on the psychedelic renaissance. You've heard me say it before, and I'll continue to say it in each episode. We are in the middle of a psychedelic renaissance. The world as we know it is going through a huge transition. Mental health issues are on the rise. MDMA on the verge of approval as a treatment for PTSD. Psychedelic therapy is on track to become the next major breakthrough in mental health care. MAPS Canada and MAPS US, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, are on the forefront of conducting studies to develop psychedelics into safe and legal medical treatments since their formation. To conduct and publish scientific research and education supporting the beneficial use of psychedelic medicines, MAPS relies on public donations and fundraising initiatives. The funds raised from this webinar series will go to fund this research. So thank you for being here because your investment makes a difference. To view the different studies that MAPS is currently working on, please see full details at mapscanada.org and maps.org. So some housekeeping items for today. We will start with a conversation with MAPS founder, Rick Doblin. After that, we will start our Q&A session. Make sure and vote up your questions and let us know where you are tuning in from in the chat today. Looks like we have people from all over. We have Williams Lake, we have Salt Spring Island, we have Yukon, we have Ontario, Richmond, we have Lethbridge, Alberta, Whistler, BC, Northern Saskatchewan, Waterloo, Colorado, Victoria, Toronto, Brazil, Calgary, all over the place. Thank you guys for letting us know where you are tuning in from. This is a very special episode because we have Rick Doblin with us today. So Rick Doblin, Ph.D., is the founder and executive director of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. He received his doctorate in public policy from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, where he wrote his dissertation on the regulation of the medical uses of psychedelics and marijuana as his master's thesis, and his master's thesis on a survey of oncologists about smoked marijuana versus the oral THC pill and nausea control for cancer patients. His undergraduate thesis at New College of Florida was a 25-year follow-up to the classic Good Friday experiment, which evaluated the potential of psychedelic drugs to catalyze religious experiences. He also conducted a 34-year follow-up study to Timothy Leary's Concord prison experiment. Rick studied with Dr. Stanislav Grof and was among the first to be certified as a holotropic breathwork practitioner. His professional goal is to help develop legal context for the beneficial uses of psychedelics and marijuana, primarily as prescription medicines, but also for personal growth for otherwise healthy people, and eventually to become a legally licensed psychedelic therapist. He founded MAPS in 1986 and currently resides in Boston with his wife, dog, and empty rooms from 3 children, one of whom is in college and 2 who have already graduated. So please help me welcome Rick Doblin. Drum roll. Do we have Rick here?
Yay, hello, thank you.
Yay! Welcome, Rick. It's so great.
All over Canada and the world, Brazil as well. We're looking forward to it.
So great to have you here today. So we have a whole bunch of questions to ask you and talk to you about. And then we'll also go to our Ask a Question at the bottom of the screen. about 45 minutes in and go to those questions from Crowdcast as well. So first of all, thank you for being here with us. It's always a pleasure to have you here. And we'll hop right into some of these questions. So I thought maybe you could start out by telling us what MAPS has been up to and give us a little bit of an update.
What has MAPS been up to? Well, let me give you a sense that there's two parts. There's MAPS, which is the nonprofit that I started in April 1986. And then there's the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation that we started in December 2014. And together we have almost 100 people. So we're up to a lot, in other words. Around 2/3 of the people work for the Public Benefit Corporation, which is a for-profit company maximizing public benefit over profit. And that's our pharmaceutical development arm, and that will be the entity that sells MDMA as a prescription medicine if we do get approval, and that would be for-profit. And we would be a reasonable profit, and then whatever profits will go towards the mission of MAPS. So the Benefit Corp is 100% owned by the nonprofit. So people donate to the nonprofit invests in the Benefit Corp. The Benefit Corp does the research and will eventually sell MDMA and does the training of therapists. So what we've been up to recently is unfortunately twiddling our thumbs while COVID has shut a lot of things down. But nevertheless, we have started about 5 of our 14 sites for phase 2. Our second phase 3 study, are just starting up. We've been finishing up the data processing, the data cleansing, the data queries, the data lock is coming up for our first phase 3 study. So the last data we gathered was, I think, around the 12th or so, 14th of August. And so we're working to make sure all the data is solid and any questions are answered. And we believe by October 20th that we will know if our first of 2 phase 3 studies was statistically significant. And if so, that's a tremendous news. We think it's likely to be. We had an interim analysis in March, and that one said that that was when we had 60% of the people had reached their primary outcome measure, which is 60, and all 100 people had been enrolled. But then COVID hit, things were shut down, and the FDA reached out to us and to others and said, other sponsors of other drugs, and said, are you interested in negotiating with us about ending early? And so we said we were. And so we came to agreement to end with 90 people instead of 100. So the fewer people you have, the harder it is to get statistical significance. The more people you have, the easier it is to get statistical significance, even with smaller and smaller effects. The more people you have, you can see smaller and smaller effects. But we have a pretty large effect, we think. And so we were comfortable agreeing to end with 90. Now, in addition to that, what we've also been doing is getting ready to start a study with eating disorders, MDMA for eating disorders. And that'll be in Vancouver, in Toronto, and in Denver. And so we're very close to starting that study as well. We're interested in studying marijuana for PTSD. And luckily for us, you guys are way ahead of us in Canada as far as marijuana legalization, but we have a bunch of states that have legalized marijuana. And in particular, Michigan, and friends of ours from the Marijuana Policy Project worked on that. And they put in a couple lines that have this massive impact, which is that of the first money that comes in from the taxes, $40 million, $20 million a year for 2 years, needs to go towards research into cannabis for veterans' mental health and reducing veteran suicides. So over the last 4 or 5 months, we've been developing a protocol that will study high THC versus placebo in veterans, probably maybe 400 or 500 veterans. And we're going to be submitting it to the FDA fairly soon, and then hopefully we'll negotiate with the FDA a bit. The state of Michigan has not yet produced what's called a RFP, request for proposals, but we think they may do so before the end of the year. They've been doing very good selling lots of marijuana. and raise lots of money in taxes. We've been also preparing for what's called a pre-IND meeting. IND is investigational new drug. So it's a meeting before you start your first study with FDA, and this would be for Ibogaine for opiate addiction. We're glad to report that some donors in England have given Robin Card Harris and David Nutt a big chunk of money to do an Ibogaine safety study. The for-profit company Atai is interested in Ibogaine. We're sympathetic with for-profit stuff, but we think that it's good to have nonprofits sort of keep a check on the for-profit. So we're moving forward with that. We also have got good news from FDA in that they've approved a study at the Bronx VA, and this will be kind of a cost effectiveness study. It's not part of our phase 3, but it's going to compare a group of people that get 2 sessions with MDMA and 9 non-drug psychotherapy sessions, 3 before the first MDMA session for preparation and for building a therapeutic alliance, and then 3 sessions after each MDMA session for integration. And that'll be comparing one group that gets 2 sessions and one group that gets 3 sessions of MDMA, and then 12 90-minute non-drug psychotherapy sessions. We already believe, of course, that 3 sessions people will improve faster than 2 sessions. But the study here is going to do both 2-month and 1-year follow-ups. And so what we've shown from our phase 2 data is that, 23% of the people that had therapy without active MDMA, these are the worst cases, hardest cases, chronic treatment-resistant PTSD, 23% no longer had PTSD at the 2-month follow-up, and 56% no longer had PTSD at the 2-month follow-up, which is great. But at the 12-month follow-up, 2/3 no longer had PTSD. So what that means is people learn how to process trauma, and they can keep getting better on their own. So after the 2-month follow-up, we don't do anything. They can start new therapies. They can do whatever they want, start smoking pot, whatever. So we can't say that the change is all due to MDMA, but we can say that people keep getting better. So the 2 sessions versus 3 sessions, we believe that people will get better more rapidly with 3 sessions, but maybe at the 1-year follow-up, they'll be more or less the same. We don't know. But what that does is it cuts down the cost of the treatment by 1/3. So instead of 3 sessions, it's 2 sessions. So it's a cost-effectiveness study. But what's even more important is that if the director of the Bronx VA gives permission to submit the protocol to their IRB, and if their IRB approves it, then we will get DEA approval, and it'll be inside the VA system. So that'll be a massive step in terms of mainstreaming psychedelics. So we've been working on that a lot. The other things that we're doing is that we are, you may have seen some people, we've successfully completed a $30 million fundraising campaign called our Capstone Challenge. And so that means unless COVID completely knocks us down and we can't really do much work for the next year or so, we'll have enough money to complete all the data that we need for FDA, then for Health Canada, then also for the Israeli Ministry of Health. We have been, we're about to start, here this is for MAPS Canada. We're going to start a MAPS Israel as well. We have a MAPS Europe. We've been really thinking about globalizing. So if indeed we get statistical significance from our first phase 3 study, which we'll know, I said, about October 20th, then we're going to start a new $30 million campaign to raise money for Europe and for the rest of the world. So that's going to be a super big challenge. I'll just throw this in now, but it's very interesting. On Friday, Compass Pathways, the for-profit company that's developing psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression, had their initial public offering, IPO, and they raised $100 million in investors, or more than that, 125, something like that. So they're loaded with cash. And according to the stock market, their company is worth $1 billion. And they are in phase 2. We're in phase 3. Now, you could say that they have a 1-session model, which is less expensive than ours. There's more people that have depression than have PTSD. So, maybe their company is worth more than MAPS, even though we are in phase 3. But it shows that through the generosity of donors, which is over the history of MAPS, we've raised over $100 million of US dollars in donations. Wow. And so what that suggests is that we've built an enormous amount of public value. So I don't own any of it. Nobody owns any of it. It's the nonprofit that owns the public benefit corp. So we're trying to really move this forward in a public benefit way, and we're very excited about that. We're also thinking about in other ways, and then we'll get to your question number 2. We're also thinking about drug policy reform. So one of the advantages of not having to give money to investors back is that we are able to really think about what is our main goal. Our main goal is mass mental health. Humanity as a whole is questionably mature, potentially insane. Look at what we're doing with the environment, with global warming, the massive amounts of denial about the damage that we're doing to the earth, to ourselves. There's going to be so many climate refugees coming up, the weapons of mass destruction, the wars, the hatreds. So what we're saying is we're interested in mass mental health. We feel that we need that. And so the medicalization is a strategy to change people's attitudes and have drug policy reform so that we can have these drugs available in a licensed legalization system, which we can talk about more what that really means. But what we want to do is to not have people buy it from us. People should be able to get psychedelics on their own in this licensed legalization way. They shouldn't have to go to medicine or to religion. They should be able to do this. And so David Bronner, who's on our board of directors, has been a major funder, as have some of the other, Joe Green from the Psychedelic Science Funders Collaborative and others, to the Oregon Psilocybin Initiative, which is trying to create a state system that's somewhat licensed to therapists, things like that, but it's not just for patients, it's for personal growth. So it'll be a big step forward. So we're very sympathetic with those kind of maneuvers. And so what we're doing is we're building up our Zendo team, our Zendo psychedelic harm reduction team. We've just actually got an arrangement with the Denver Police Department. So Denver has made mushrooms the lowest enforcement priority. And so Sarah Gale, who built up Zendo and has been a tremendous Zendo trainer, lives in Boulder. So she's going to be training the Denver police to try to help them know what to do if they find people that have difficult trips with psilocybin, tourists or locals, whatever. So we want to build up our capacity to educate people, not just therapists, but people in a smaller kind of educational thing about handling their difficult psychedelic experiences, their own and others. So I think that's a good sense. We're also doing a lot of media as much as possible, public education, and we're starting to build up our sort of advocacy team. Now that there's more laws that we want to impact. So overall, we're keeping everybody busy. We've got 100 people almost, and they're all super busy trying to work on mass mental health.
Wow, that all sounds incredible. And yeah, like you said, mass mental health. There's so much going on at the moment in MAPS. It's great to hear all of the different studies that are coming up. I want to talk a little bit more about the connection to drug policy reform that you mentioned in a little bit here. But we also want to know, what is on the leadership vision for MAPS in, let's say, the next, 2, 5, even 10 years? What do you foresee happening?
Well, what we foresee happening is we think now, if we're fortunate, if things go well, end of 2022, early 2023, we should have FDA approval for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. Because we have sites in Canada, sites in Israel, sites in the US, we will submit the data from all of our phase 3 data to all 3 regulatory agencies at the same time. However, unless our political leaders completely politicize the FDA like they are already trying to do, and they lose all credibility, what is happening right now is that they are the best agency in the world with the most people to evaluate. EMA is good, European Medicines Agency is good also, but what will happen is that the FDA will go first, Canada and Israel will wait to see what the FDA does. If they say yes, then they'll say yes. So then what we see happening is a increase in the number of psychedelic clinics, because the way that we're negotiating with FDA and the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, is that the only people that can prescribe this drug are people that have been through our training for prescribers. Sorry, let me turn this off.
I like your ringtone.
Yeah, that was Amy Emerson, the head of our benefit corp. So I'll call her back later. So the only people that can prescribe are been through our training program, and the only people that can do therapy are also through our therapy program, and they can only treat people under direct supervision. So what that means is that clinics, and so what we really see happening is going to be clinics. Now, we already see some ketamine clinics, well over 100 in the United States. I'm not sure what the number actually is. It might be quite a bit more than that. I'm not sure how many are in Canada. But what we're finding is that the ketamine providers, some of them are the sort of anesthesiologists, others. Ketamine was approved without therapy. And the idea is that ketamine by itself makes pharmacological changes, and whatever's happening subjectively, it makes no difference. We know that's not true, but that's the way it was approved as a medicine, so it's easier to distribute. So a lot of anesthesiologists are turning electroconvulsive therapy suites where they used to shock people into giving them ketamine, and they don't talk to them. But what it looks like is that when you combine S-ketamine with therapy, that you get better results. And so those people that are running ketamine clinics, some of them are really setting up ketamine clinics because they want to be on the ground floor when we get MDMA approved. Psilocybin will probably be coming down the road sometime in 2023, I would guess, as well. Hopefully we'll be first, just out of personal ego reasons, but we'd like to be the first. But what's going to happen is that these clinics are not going to be, here's a Compass clinic, here's a USONA, which is the nonprofit for psilocybin, here's a MAPS clinic. The therapists that are going to do therapy, they want to be cross-trained in all of these different drugs. And so they're talking about, and what we're talking about, is psychedelic medicine. And then you will customize what these different drugs are that you have available for your particular patient, what sequence they need, how often they need it. So what we're going to see is over the next 5-10 years, I believe there'll be hundreds and then thousands of these psychedelic clinics spread all over the world. We hope if we can raise this extra 30 million for Europe and the globalization that Europe will approve near the end of 2023. That's potentially the case because we only have to do one phase 3 study of 70 people in Europe. And I think that there are different ways to talk about these networks of clinics. There are some for-profit companies that want to set up and own hundreds of these or thousands of these. Our preferred model, at least at the moment, is that we would like to have local ownership of these clinics, that the therapists would own it. Now, how they do that, they have to raise money. Where do they get the money from to buy these? Or maybe they just start out small and rent. But we will sell to prescribers. There will be everybody that goes through our training program and understands our therapy can be a therapist, but they don't have to stick with our method. They can modify, they can innovate, they can do different things. We're ourselves, we're looking at a bunch of studies combining MDMA with various evidence-based therapies for PTSD, like prolonged exposure, cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive processing therapy. We have about 70 what are called investigator-initiated trials. Now, none of them are active yet, but these are different research teams from all over the world that have contacted us and say they want to do something with MDMA. And so we say, great, we will provide MDMA, we'll give you a template, we'll let you cross-reference all of our data at the FDA, or we'll submit it to your own regulatory agency. So they want to do a whole wide range of things. Some of them are interested in EMDR combining with MDMA. In Native American populations, and other there'll be projects combining MDMA with mindfulness-based programs for PTSD as well. So in any case, people can innovate. On the other hand, for those people that are going to use our method, we will sort of certify them. So they'll be MAPS trained, MAPS certified, so that if you are MAPS certified, that means people know what they're going to get. And the MAPS certified people can also do some degree of innovation and wheel test. So what I see really happening is these thousands of psychedelic clinics happening, and that over time, over a decade or so, should change public attitudes about psychedelics and cause them to question the drug war. Right now, if you're caught with an equivalent amount of cocaine or MDMA, you would go to jail longer for the MDMA, which doesn't make sense, but it's punitive. So we think that a lot of the polling has been done, interestingly enough, about why people vote for marijuana legalization. And one of the most important factors is that they know a medical marijuana patient. So medicalization changes people's attitudes, then they want to see broader drug policy reform. So we think that these clinics will be treating all sorts of people, and then the word will get out. And then I think by 2035 is my current prediction, we'll have licensed legalization. And we think that a lot of people will still want to go for the clinics. It'll be covered by insurance. It'll be the hardest cases. There's going to be so many of them anyway. So we think that if we can embed this in the culture with honest drug education, with pure drugs access, and also with harm reduction policies, while we simultaneously develop the medicine and the clinics. And then I'll just say that what we want to do is look at other indications for MDMA. And in particular, though, for PTSD, we want to start looking at group therapy. So I think that's going to be a really interesting move to go from individual therapy, which is what we're doing now, to group therapy models. And it's not clear that the group therapy models are going to be any more effective. They might be less effective sometimes, but maybe they're not much less effective. Or maybe in some people they're just as good, but if the cost is 1/3 less or whatever, then it can make a lot of sense. So we're really excited about in the future looking at group therapy. The other thing in the future that the FDA has required us to do is called Pediatric Studies. So if we succeed in adults, we have to work with 12 to 17-year-olds. We have to work with traumatized adolescents. And if that works, which we think it will, then we have to work with 7 to 11-year-olds who are traumatized.
Interesting.
And so, a lot of drugs are tested in adults, but never tested in children. We just heard today in the news that people are saying, well, if we get a vaccine for COVID, it's only for adults because they're not enrolling kids in these studies. And their rationale is that they're doing that for the first responders, for the healthcare workers. They're all adults. Eventually, they'll get down to working with kids. But I'm very much looking forward to that because I think the closer to the trauma that you can treat people, the easier it'll be to treat them, the less expensive it'll be to treat them, and the more life they'll have ahead of them in a healthier state. And I also think that the war on drugs is so focused on, protect the children, that if we can, now they ignore, of course, all the kids that get methamphetamine and everything for attention deficit disorder and stuff like that. But we do think that if we succeed in adults, doing these pediatric studies is going to be really eye-opening for a lot of people. And many of your people who are listening, you may have heard about the octopus study that was done out of Johns Hopkins, giving MDMA to octopuses. Octopuses are solitary creatures, unless it's mating season, which is not that often, and they don't really like other octopuses. But you give them MDMA, and all of a sudden they're hugging other octopuses. So what it means, and then studies have shown in mice that it releases oxytocin, that oxytocin is the hormone of love and bonding in nursing mothers, and that the oxytocin promotes new neural connections in pro-social areas of the brain. So you're actually rewiring your brain, which is terrific. But what all that means is that it works at a pre-verbal level. If you can help octopuses hug other octopuses when they normally wouldn't, we can probably assume, it's a little bit of a leap, but that the pro-social self-acceptance, healing aspects of MDMA will work with 7 to 11-year-olds, even if they don't have a lot of the words to describe what's going on. So.
Wow, that's so great to hear. So many good things going on there, Rick. What would you say are the most pressing issues that we are dealing with today in regards to psychedelic science, research, medicine, and legalization, and also drug policy reform?
Well, one of the pressing issues I'll say I just mentioned is Compass, being worth $1 billion. So are we going to be able to hire people? Are they going to all want to go to companies that pay them big salaries and give them stock and stuff? How are we going to, will we be able to raise philanthropic dollars? Will they want to just, everybody want to invest? We think there's good answers to all these things, so I'm not really worried about that. I think the other big issue is just, though, when you roll out something new in society that's been controversial in the past, like psychedelics, the initial impressions that people get, the initial impressions that society gets, are more important than later impressions. And so we want to try to make sure that all these companies are really prioritizing patient outcomes over profit, so that there's not a lot of backlash from this as we start rolling it out. One of the other big issues is equity. We ourselves, I myself, mistakenly assumed that in phase 2, particularly in our studies with veterans, that we'd have large numbers of people of color volunteering for the study, but we didn't have any. So how do we get people of color? Well, our thought, of course, was train therapists of color. So how do we train therapists of color? We're in the process of doing that. There was just a really good article in the Wall Street Journal. The Washington Post. And there was a lot about this. And it's going to be in the Washington Post magazine, I think, coming up. But you can search Washington Post, MDMA, PTSD. It's a great article. And a lot of it is about this issue of health equity. How do we get to the people that most need it? So, for example, we've heard that in America, the people most dying of COVID are the people of color, and they're dying disproportionately, and a lot of them don't have insurance. So how do we get these treatments to the people that need them the most? Even if we get insurance to cover it, what about all these people that don't have insurance? It's not like Canada, where you have a humane national health care policy. And we've got the Supreme Court here is all primed by the Republicans to eliminate the Affordable Care Act and make it so that pre-existing conditions are no longer covered, which is going to be terrible because that also includes COVID. So anyway, we don't know how that's going to turn out, but I think a big issue going forward is this health equity piece. And so we're doing what we can to try to train therapists of color, get scholarships for people of color, some of them at least, to go through the therapy. Other issues are going to be really this whole question about can we successfully mainstream this in terms of the Veterans Administration, the Department of Defense, Medicaid, government, so there's private insurance, but can we get governments to really start paying for it and adopting it? We think chances are pretty good that that'll happen, but it'll take time. Another major issue is training therapists. How do we scale the number of therapists? I like the 2 therapy model. Now, if people go to therapists, you almost never go to 2 therapists. Therapists work by themselves unless it's a group therapy situation. But for us, the 2 therapy model, not always, but often the male-female model, or female-male identified or whatever, or non-binary people are totally welcome. But this idea of this male-female model, 2-person model, provides more safety, more support, 2 different perspectives, but it's more expensive. So we're negotiating with FDA about the credentials of the people that can provide the therapy. And we would like the one person, the lead therapist, to be licensed as a therapist, not an MD, Ph.D. necessarily, although they could be, but just licensed therapist. The other person we would like to be an apprentice to, or a student, or somebody that doesn't even have a bachelor's degree necessarily, a sound therapist, a massage therapist, but somebody that works at less of a rate than the first person. We'd like to keep the 2-person model, but we want to make it economical to the extent that we can. So that's going to be a big challenge. Right now, the FDA is a little bit worried about rolling this out, and if they get the problems, are they going to be criticized for being too lax? So they, for a while, were trying to say that the lead person needs to be MD, Ph.D. And so we're going to be spending about $200,000 on lawyers to argue this out with the FDA, which is very disappointing. I wish we could just put that money into the research, but they're not listening to the data so far. Because in phase 3, we do have this situation where the lead person is a therapist, but not an MD, PhD. The second person can be a student. FDA has also been saying for these clinics, and I think this is a really important point, they're wanting to require a doctor on site, which I think makes no sense whatsoever. There needs to be a doctor to do the screening. There needs to be a doctor on call, but these drugs are not that dangerous. Psilocybin, MDMA, the people who are properly screened are not going to have problems. We haven't had problems like that. So trying to make it so that there's a doctor on call but not on site is going to be really important for the cost effective of this going forward. So that's another thing. And I think the drug policy reform, the concern is that, again, if you do the drug policy reform, what if it gets out of hand? What if people start having these difficult trips? Will that start changing people's minds? Will there be another backlash? I don't think so. But that's why we're trying to expand our Zendo training and sort of embed more knowledge in more people about how to properly support people going through a difficult trip.
Accidentally muting myself there. Sorry about that.
I haven't been following the chat only because, I can't do it with my glasses, and you get all this reflection and stuff.
You have some great comments in the chat, and I see Charlene also posted a link there for you as well to the Washington Post article. And we have our Ask a Question is just piling up, 16 questions in there. So I know we're at about 40 minutes after. Did you want to move into the Crowdcast questions now?
It's all up to you, Shannon, unless you've got some. Well, how about this? Why don't you ask me the hardest question you've got there?
Oh, my goodness. I have a whole bunch of hard ones.
Or one or two hard ones, and then we'll go to the other ones.
Sounds great. Well, let's find out exactly what the Psychedelic Renaissance is. It's the title of our webinar series. We've been asking, all of their speakers on their take on the Psychedelic Renaissance. What is your take, Rick Doblin, on the Psychedelic Renaissance?
Well, the Psychedelic Renaissance means the flourishing of psychedelic research, the changing of public attitudes towards psychedelics. There's a great chart that I show in some of my PowerPoint talks about the number of publications on psychedelics from the Web of Science. And we are way over the number of publications now than from the 1960s and early 70s. So there is a flourishing of psychedelic research in all different ways. And on top of it, we've got money. Let me put it a different way. Academic institutions are now rushing to set up their own psychedelic research centers. NYU, Johns Hopkins, Yale, UC San Francisco, Stanford, Harvard, MGH, Massachusetts General Hospital. So we've gotten over the psychedelics as counterculture, troublemaking drugs, psychedelics as delusions, psychedelics as causing psychosis, as the main frame. Not to say that psychedelics don't have their risks, but that we've gotten to the point where psychedelics are really now being welcomed in the mainstream of psychiatry, the mainstream of academic institutions, government regulators. We're hoping major foundations will start funding it. So far, our funds have all come from individuals, basically, or individuals who have family foundations. So the Psychedelic Renaissance is here just in time to try to help produce this mass mental health at a time of massive crisis that humanity is facing. So the Psychedelic Renaissance is like, why I started talking about Psychedelic Renaissance is it's like the emergence from the Dark Ages. And the Dark Ages were the 70s and 80s and much of the early part of the 90s, where all this research was suppressed and blocked by fearful government agencies. And now we're coming out of the Dark Ages into the Renaissance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you've been at this a while. I was wondering if you could share some of your proudest moments in your career as a leader of the
Okay.
psychedelic movement.
Well, I'd say one of my very proudest moments was in 2008 and a little bit in 2007 when we started getting permission for the first study of LSD in 35 years. And this was a study in Switzerland that was for LSD for people with life-threatening illnesses who are anxious about dying. But the thing that made me proud is that we got this approved just months before Albert Hoffman's wife, Anita, and Albert himself died. So that he died at 102. They were married for 79 years. She died just a few months before Albert did. And so they got to see with their own eyes the very beginning of the psychedelic renaissance as it started opening the door to LSD research. So to give Anita and Albert that sense of possibility, Albert talked a lot about LSD as his problem child, his autobiography, LSD, My Problem Child, but he talked about it how it could also be a wonder child, and he wants his problem child to turn into a wonder child. So for Albert to see the research with his own eyes starting again was one of the most proud things that has ever happened. Other things that make me exceedingly proud are just the stories of the patients that are in our studies. A lot of them talk about how it saved their lives, how they were some of them had tried to commit suicide multiple times, and fortunately had not succeeded, and then found their way to MDMA and now are not suicidal. So just the stories of the patients are so inspirational that it just really, very much makes you proud to do that. The other part that's been that's made me proud in a way is the trust that the donors have given us with their resources that I mentioned before, that we've got over $100 million of donations so far. Now, that's over 34 years. Compass got 100 million in a week, from their initial public offering, but it's a different kind of a thing. And they couldn't have done that 34 years ago, or they couldn't have even done it 4 years ago, or 3 years ago. They had to start establishing their own reputation and things. So there's a lot to be proud of. I'd say the other big thing that I'm very proud of is 1992. And that's where there was a big meeting at the FDA about whether they would open the door to psychedelic research. That's really what caused the psychedelic renaissance, was the FDA being willing to stop suppressing psychedelic research. And they were reviewing our protocol with Charlie Grobe and myself and MAPS, and it was MDMA for cancer patients with anxiety. And they knew that they had approved Rick Strassman for a DMT study in 1990. A new group of people took over at the FDA in 1990 regulating psychedelics. And so Rick's study was the first, but it was also a negative study. His idea, in the sense, was that DMT is the only endogenous psychedelic in the brain, and maybe too much of it makes you psychotic or schizophrenic or whatever. So he was sort of looking at, does DMT cause schizophrenia in your brain? Is that a possibility? And then we came along, Charlie Grobe and I came along with something looking at the positive. Can we use it for therapy to help people? And so the FDA had a advisory committee meeting. The National Institute on Drug Abuse had 2-day meeting of all their animal researchers right before that, who were trying to look at mechanism of action and various different things, abuse liability. In the animal models, they decided that they would recommend human research being resumed because eventually the animal models become irrelevant unless you can correlate it with human data. You don't know quite what you have. So that was really one thing that I was extremely proud of, is this body of information that we presented to FDA with our various experts about our protocol for MDMA for cancer patients, and that the FDA and their advisory committee said yes, they would open the door to psychedelic research. They would just hold us to the same standards as Big Pharma, but that was really the turning point. towards the psychedelic renaissance. So I was extremely proud to be involved in that. I'll just say one last thing that I was proud of is that when the DEA moved to criminalize MDMA in the summer of 1984, and I went to Washington and filed for a hearing with this group, Earth Metabolic Design Lab, the nonprofit before MAPS, we slowed down the FDA for about a year from the DEA, excuse me, we slowed down the DEA for about a year from criminalizing MDMA. And I always thought about all those people that got MDMA legally during that year and how tremendous of a victory that was, that they could have these experiences, because a large number of people really had a lot of great experiences that they might not have done if it was illegal.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's great to hear all of those milestones along the way, Rick.
Yeah, but I'll say one last thing. The one I'll be most proud of is when FDA says yes, if they say yes to the prescription use of MDMA for PTSD.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So one last thing here, speaking about moving beyond the medicine, are there any final words that you wanted to add about moving beyond the medicine and the connection to drug policy reform?
Yeah, that there's a whole bunch of psychedelic researchers who have been historically very worried about what happens when research produced in the lab is now used by political actors to try to get drug policy reform. And so there have been some that have been excessively worried that the drug policy reform efforts will have a boomerang effect and cause a backlash by regulatory agencies against the research. And so J.R. Ron from Mind Medicine, one of the for-profit psychedelics, has said, I want nothing to do with those kind of people that want to decriminalize psilocybin. And others have been even more extreme than that. So I guess what I want to say is that thinking is completely and 100% wrong. And that we have not seen that. And in fact, it's the opposite, that the more there is drug policy reform, the suppression of psychedelics have been part of this effort to not say good things about illegal drugs, so that the penalties can go on, the war on drugs can go on, mass incarceration could go on. And when you start talking about drug policy reform, it actually makes it easier for regulatory agencies to move forward with the research. And at the same time, we're trying to address a massive evil, counterproductive mass incarceration that's used as racist political means in many different ways. So I think that the understanding that drug policy reform helps the research, doesn't hurt the research, and it fits with our moral obligations to provide people with cognitive liberty to explore their own consciousness, that it's something that we should be embracing rather than running away from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you for that. So we have 19 questions here in our Ask a Question. You're definitely a popular guy. So let's maybe start with the first question here with 10 votes at the top from Michael. So why did you opt to first promote the use of MDMA as an adjunct to therapy instead of the more classic psychedelics like LSD or psilocybin?
God, I love that question. Okay, it's because basically it's a strategy question. And so I think that that's really very important. I like to say that we don't really do science, we do political science. We have to be very political in our strategies. So when I first started experiencing MDMA, which was 1982, and I saw how profound it was, how subtle it was, how subtle of a shift from normal consciousness, but how profound, that the experiences with MDMA are easier to integrate than the experiences of the classic psychedelics. Mm-hmm. It's the most, also, it's the most loving, it's the most inherently therapeutic of all the psychedelics. There's fewer, quote, bad trips, even though, difficult is not the same as bad, and bad, you can learn from the most difficult trips a lot of times more than from easier trips. So I felt that MDMA was the most gentle of all the psychedelics, It's easier to integrate the experience, fewer difficult trips, but also a big part of our approach and our belief has been that the therapists who want to work with these drugs will be more effective if they've tried the drug themselves. Now, if you say something like, oh, meditation teachers are going to be more effective meditation teachers if they've meditated themselves, that's not a surprising conclusion. Or yoga teachers can teach yoga better if they've done some yoga themselves. Or psychoanalysts who want to do psychoanalysis have to go through their own psychoanalysis. We accept that. Or therapists, it helps for them to go through their own therapy. All of those we just accept without question. But for psychedelics, now all of a sudden, because they're illegal, we have to have special protocols. We have to try to go all sorts of different efforts and steps to try to make that possible. But mainstream psychiatrists and psychotherapists are more frightened of taking classic psychedelics than they are of taking MDMA. So in reaching out to the professions that we are wanting to get involved in the treatment of patients, therapists and psychiatrists, coming forward initially with MDMA is going to be an easier thing. The other part, and this gets to the combination strategy, why PTSD. So what we needed to do is to try to find a very substantial patient population that had a very disturbing mental illness that often would lead to suicide or disability, for which the general population in America, mostly, but true around the world, but mostly in America, that the patients were highly sympathetic. So, and also that the available medications and therapies helped a bunch of people, but left a lot of them unsuccessfully treated. We'd call that treatment resistant, or that they needed more. So that there's a massive unmet need with a patient population that's highly respected or appreciated. So we have veterans and others that are highly appreciated in America. And also PTSD is mostly women, sexual abuse and domestic assault, and they are sympathetic patients. Psychedelics are phenomenal for substance abuse. Bill W., who started AA, had his first experience going sober with belladonna. Then later he did LSD. But people who have substance abuse problems are the other, that we otherize them. They're not the ideal patient population. The psilocybin people wisely began with people who are dying that had or life-threatening illnesses, because everybody's going to be in that situation. We're all sympathetic with them as well. But I felt that MDMA being, again, the most gentle, the easiest to integrate, the least fear in the professions, and then MDMA being ideal for PTSD with a large unmet need for new treatments and sympathetic patients, so that the MDMA PTSD combination just seemed like the way to go. So that's how we did it. And now we're in phase 3. We're the only psychedelic psychotherapy in phase 3 at the moment.
Wonderful.
Yeah, even though I've been consistently talking against the drug war too. So that illustrates that further point, that has not held us back.
Absolutely. Good point there. We have a question from Jamie. If in the future there are health spa-like facilities where the general public can go to have psychedelic sacred experiences, what should one do now to prepare for a career as a professional guide?
Okay. Well, the answer is there will be those things. I would just make a slight distinction. You talked about psychedelic sacred, but I'd like to say that celebration is sacred too. So, what I mean is festivals, raves, things like that can be sacred in a different kind of a way, a celebratory way. So it's not going to be just going to clinics, and this is the drug policy reform side of it, but group bonding in Grateful Dead concerts, which are often very psychedelic. Just those kind of other contexts can be very healing, very sacred, and so I don't want to say that it's just sacred in these clinic settings. But the way to prepare oneself I think just becoming a good therapist, because these are, in these clinic settings, these are drugs that are used for therapy. So becoming a therapist. Now, there's also, you could become a massage therapist or a music therapist and work with a psychotherapist. The best way, I think, is to have your own experiences. And a lot of people say, oh, I've tripped a lot of times, but people do it in group settings, party settings, even if they've done it themselves. To have somebody there that's not tripping, that's your support, will permit you to go a lot deeper than if you can, because you don't have to have part of your mind thinking about your own survival. I have to respond in case there's a fire. I have to do, what if somebody comes by the door, so that a lot of people who've tripped alone, I think you can go pretty far, very deep. And I've done some of my most important trips by myself. But I would say that having somebody there is often can help you go deeper, or being in a super safe space and having experience in the past. So having your own experiences. The other, I think, is sitting for friends or other people, practicing trying to be helpful to others. We have this whole concept that's been widely spread throughout our culture of designated drivers, so that somebody stays sober among a group of friends, and they're the ones that drive. So we could have like the designated sober person among all the people that are tripping. So I think your own experiences, sitting for others, becoming, studying to be a psychotherapist, holotropic breath work. There's other modalities. A lot of times meditation. So for example, when an 8-hour MDMA session is taking place with a 2-therapist team, around half the time the patients are listening to music with eye shades on, having this internal, imaginative, metaphorical, incredible kind of dynamic experiences. And the other half of the time, they're talking to the therapist. With psilocybin or LSD or something like that, it's more like 80 or 90% of the time, people are having an internal experience and they're talking a lot less. So what are the therapists doing? Well, you're not supposed to be sitting there on your phone doing your emails, or you're not supposed to be just reading. You're supposed to be there to being attentive to the person that's there. And so it gets to be very meditative. You're listening to music, you're looking for body language, you're trying to be supportive. So I think there's a lot of ways to prepare. Another big one that we really overlook is dreams. Really getting into your dream states. I'll just say I had a dream this morning that was, I was at this party. It was, this whole group was ending. Then I went outside and my car was frozen to the ground and all this stuff. And I started to free up my car. And I realized, even in the course of the dream, that we've been talking to therapists who want to bring MDMA to Lebanon because of the terrible trauma there. We've tried, we have Israel as one of our sites, but we've tried to do work in Arab countries. And we had a big effort for many, many years to try to start MDMA research in Jordan. And in the end, we were not able to get permission, but we were working with some of the main psychiatrists there, the military psychiatrists, civilian psychiatrists, psychotherapists. And so this dream for me, somehow I knew as I was trying to unfreeze this car, it was about unfreezing the project in Jordan. And should I take it out of deep thaw and kind of, I don't know how but somehow or other, that was the metaphor while I'm dreaming. So I just think that dreams offer this incredible opportunity for us to practice being in a non-ordinary state of consciousness and being able to maneuver through that. So I just, that's kind of a classic psychoanalysis thing to talk about your dreams, but I do think that that's available to all of us, and we don't give it enough credit. And Freud's book, The Interpretation of Dreams, was an amazing book. So in any case, I think those are some of the things that people could be doing. Also, if you want to, look at our treatment manual. So on the MAPS website, under research, you go to MDMA, bottom of the page called treatment manual. It's about a 70-page document describing our therapeutic approach. So I'd say read that. Stan Grof has just summarized his whole life's learnings in a 2-volume Way of the Psychonaut. book that we've published. And so that would be a really helpful book for people to read. There's a textbook that he wrote called LSD Psychotherapy that's very interesting as well. And so I'd encourage people to read that. There's some beautiful things. Claudio Naranjo wrote this book, The Healing Journey, that we've also republished that I think is illustrative. Leo Zeff, the underground psychedelic therapist was called The Secret Chief. There's a small book of interviews with him, and it's The Secret Chief Revealed. And I would encourage people to look at that. Myron Stolaroff interviewed Leo Zeff, and enough years after he died, the first book was called The Secret Chief, where Leo's name was hidden, and then after a bunch of years had gone by, we republished it with The Secret Chief Revealed. So that's a really interesting book as well.
So that's a long list of homework there. a lot of options. There you go. Hey. Thanks so much for sharing all those, Rick. Okay. So we have a question here, actually from one of our speakers that's joining us today. Yeah, Sensei Kevin Simpson. He says, I live in Brooklyn, New York City, in a POC neighborhood. People here, even with my outreach, are still unaware on the current research available. With a grassroots approach in mind, is there anything MAPS can do to help my community know more about this so that we may even one day reach the hurdle of having a lack of insurance to cover the therapy bill?
You mean overcome this idea of having a lack of insurance, or?
Yeah, I think that's what he intended.
Well, this article that was in the Washington Post, that's about health equity. That's about reaching out to communities of color. What we can do, and I think what we can all do. So I'd really like to call on all the people that are here listening and look at one of the most successful social change movements of the last multiple decades. It's been gay rights, gay marriage. And what really made that move forward, now there may be backlashes, which we see in the development right now in America, but that there is nevertheless, what really made progress was people coming out. And so I'd like to call on everybody here to come out to those about your psychedelic experiences, to your friends, to your parents, to people that might not be that sympathetic. We can all do that. The other thing that we can do and are doing, there's a great article in the MAPS Bulletin. So if you go on the MAPS website and you look under news, go into the MAPS Bulletin, there's an article by a therapist of color about the work with MDMA for PTSD and how to reach out to communities of color. It's a really, really good article. I think that what we can do is also contribute to various news stories, documentaries, things like that to get the word out. One of the things that one of our staff, Natalie Ginsberg, who's the director of the policy and advocacy team, she actually moved to LA in part to try to get stories in the media, but not just media, but entertainment about psychedelics. So there's a show, Billions, on Showtime. They had an ayahuasca session, so that these kind of subliminal advertising, you could say, of getting storylines in dramas, movies, and TV is an incredible good way to get the word out. So we're seeing what we can do to have more of that take place. But I really think that this idea of therapists of color is what's going to really help spread the word in communities of color. And I also think that drug policy reform is the way to get access to people if it's not covered by insurance, that we can train more and more people to sort of do peer support and helping each other.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And I see that he was commenting in the comments there, and he says thank you for that. So we have time for a couple more questions here. We have a question here, and it is: is there any research being done on number one, bad trips, challenging trips, and its post-growth potential. And number 2, effects of psychedelic therapies on healthy volunteers. So bad trips, healthy volunteers.
Yeah. So again, difficult is not the same as bad. And so let me say that one of the things that Mind Medicine did is that they, in their early press release, they came out with this idea that a drug called ketanserin blocks the 5-HT2A receptor site. And if you give it ahead of time, you won't have, with LSD or psilocybin, the classic psychedelic, you won't have a classic psychedelic experience. If you give it after sometimes people take LSD, you can sort of help abort a trip to some extent. And so they said, oh, this is going to be a big advance. The field has been needing this, that, when the trips get bad, here we can just get a way out of it. So that's terrible. It's better to endure a difficult experience than to try to tranquilize your way out of it. And so just to give an example, the Good Friday experiment that I did the 25-year follow-up to, what I discovered is that there was one person that had a difficult experience. He heard the minister say, you got to tell people there's a man on the cross. He ran out of the chapel, ran down the street. Timothy Leary and Houston Smith ran after him. They gave him a shot of Thorazine and brought him back in because he didn't want to go back in. They hid the whole point that anybody had got Thorazine. That was never reported. So I only learned that in my follow-up study. But when I was calling all the people who were in the study, I called this particular person. He said, I don't want to talk to you, and if you ever call me again, I'm going to sue you. So what it does is, with a difficult trip, you freeze it in place, and you reinforce the idea, I can't handle what's inside me. So there's a lot of difficult experiences in treating PTSD. People have had horrible experiences happen to them. A bunch of our subjects have said, I don't know why they call this ecstasy, because it's very difficult. So we've already learned from decades and decades and decades of therapy that you support people through a difficult trip. You don't try to abort it. And you can never tell when it's going to happen, because people have buried so many stories of what's happened to them in the past, either actual or symbolic. And when they emerge, it's often difficult. These are people with emotional issues, and it's very difficult. I would encourage people to look at the Trip of Compassion, which is a tremendous movie about, it's the best documentary ever made about the actual process of MDMA therapy. It's about 3 of our Israeli patients with English subtitles. Trip of Compassion on Vimeo. You can get it, it's just a few bucks. It's really good. And you'll see people having some difficult experiences. So I don't know what kind of research they're meaning about difficult experiences, but a lot of people have them, and we've learned how to support people through them. And if something happens to you, if we find that people that take MDMA recreationally and then something difficult comes up, if they try to stuff it down, they could be worse off for months or years afterwards. So you really need to open up to it. Now, research about healthy people. We have to be strategic. We have limited resources. So what we're trying to do is create new legal contexts for people to have access to these drugs in a therapeutic context. And what that means is that we have to be working with people that have clinical conditions. So we haven't done much work in healthy volunteers. There have been some studies in healthy people. I'll sort of say one of the most important ones was cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy. Excuse me. So conjoint therapy means couple or dyads. One person has PTSD. It affects the relationship, and both people are brought into the therapy. So there's one person that has PTSD. The other person has doesn't have a diagnosis, but has been stressed by their partner having, or their person, their son or daughter, whatever person having a relationship with, having a difficult time. And so this brings both people into the therapeutic relationship. And that was the first study that we did, blending cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy with MDMA. And the results were tremendous. Both people in the dyad got MDMA, great improvements in the relationship. And I'd say one of the very best uses of MDMA in what you could otherwise call healthy people is going to be couples therapy. I mean, MDMA is phenomenal for it. Just today, a friend of mine wrote me back that they're married couple that they did their annual MDMA together, and it was tremendous. But what do we do with that? How do we get legally available couples therapy? We need that. It's one of the very best things. Is insurance coverage going to get it? No. Is the FDA going to approve it? It's not for a disease. We can do research with it. You can do research in all sorts of things. But what comes out the other end for working with healthy people? There's been healthy people have taken MDMA under experimental models of fear extinction. This has been done at Emory. There's been interesting work at healthy volunteers at the University of Chicago on MDMA and emotional perceptions of different faces, all different kind of fearful faces. So there's fair amount of research actually with healthy volunteers. But it's more funded by governments. It's for mechanism of action research. And for us, at least, it doesn't necessarily create new legal contexts for people to access therapeutic drugs. So we haven't done as much, but one day we really want to do couples therapy. And one thing I'll say that we are doing in a sense like couples therapy is with Natalie again, and Lior Roseman and Robin Card-Harris and whole teams that is with Israelis and Palestinians who are doing ayahuasca and MDMA together. So it's like psychedelic reconciliation. You look for, they have spiritual experiences of oneness and connection. Then they realize they have a lot of similarities with the people that are different than them in other ways. So that's like couples therapy writ large in cultural conflicts. So that we're very interested in that. And I just think that hopefully more and more, as we do the medical research, more and more scientists will want to look at various aspects of relationships and healthy volunteers and all different things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So there's a question here from Michael. Can you speak to the differences, similarities between the context in Canada versus the United States? What benefits, challenges, opportunities exist in one country versus the other?
Well, in one small way, I'm happy to say that America is ahead of Canada. That for expanded access and compassionate use, there's been a rule in Canada that if it's a scheduled drug, you can't get permission. Now, that has recently changed for psilocybin. Mm-hmm. Health Canada has given, I think, 9 approvals for people to work with life-threatening illness with anxiety or depression and to work with them with psilocybin. So that's not the case yet for MDMA. So far for MDMA, for PTSD, there's no expanded access, compassionate use in Canada. But there is in the U.S. We're ahead of Canada in one way. The other part of it, I think, is that Health Canada, it has been very, at the initial stages, even harder to work with than FDA. Just to give you an example, I mean, the first study of psychedelic research in Canada in many, many decades was our study with MDMA for PTSD in Vancouver. And it was so hard to get Health Canada to let us go forward. And it ended up being this ridiculous story about the security for the MDMA. And so it was at a pharmacy that has all these opiate drugs that are held under less security than the MDMA. And then we had to follow this long list of Health Canada requirements. And we did that. And then they sent out an inspector, and then you got to wait too much for their inspector to come. They sent out the inspector, and the guy said, look, you've done everything you told us, but we've changed our rules. Now you got to do this too, which was we had to add bulletproof glass to all these windows. That, to have a few grams of MDMA in a safe that was alarmed to the police, that was in a locked room, and now we have to have bulletproof glass when all these opiates are like right out there. I mean, there's security as well. So Health Canada was really difficult to work with initially, but I think they've gotten comfortable with what we're doing, and now they're much easier. But in general, the regulatory agencies around the world look to the FDA. or to the European Medicines Agency. So, we really had to get FDA going first, then Health Canada, Ministry of Health in Israel went different. But otherwise, I think it's going to be easier to get insurance coverage in Canada than in the US because of national health care. Because when you have national health care, when people are disabled from PTSD or other things, the government is stuck with the bill. In America, when you are suffering, the disability is not paid for by the insurance companies. They'll pay for your health care, but if you're disabled, that ends up going on to the government or the Veterans Administration. So the true costs are not collected in one spot in America, but they are in Canada. So I think it'll be easier to get approval for payment in Canada than in the US. Other than that, it's pretty much equivalent. The protocols are evaluated scientifically the same way. The institutional review boards are evaluated, look similarly. There's another problem in Canada. There's yet one more way that America is better. In that in America, you do not need institutional affiliation to do research. So in Canada, you do. In Israel, you do. A lot of places in Europe, you do. So our Montreal site, now, the worst excesses of the CIA MKUltra mind control, the worst of it took place at the Allen Memorial Institute connected to McGill in Montreal. You could do some research on it. This was in the late 50s, early 60s. They destroyed people's minds. They tried to make people pre-verbal and then build them back up again. And a lot of them were postpartum women, and they would give electroshock and LSD. And in any case, the legacy of that is so bad still that in Montreal, our psychiatrist for our Montreal site was trained at McGill, had good relationships with the McGill faculty. He even arranged for me to speak at the Allen Memorial Institute after all these years about psychedelics. But nobody in Montreal connected to an academic institution would affiliate with the study. So a woman, Emma Hapke, in Toronto at the University of Toronto saved the day. And so the University of Toronto is the affiliation for the study in Montreal. But in the United States, if we would have had to start with institutional affiliation, we might not have been able to start at all because institutions are more conservative. And so the freedom to do research without an institutional affiliation in America really was crucial for us to start MDMA research in the US. So I think we have a little bit more of that freedom in certain ways in the US than in Canada.
Absolutely. Well, we're almost at time here, but there are 3 questions that have to do with being a therapist. So I'll get into these and I'll read them all here for you. And then, because they kind of all have to deal with one another. One says, what are the education requirements to become a counselor that works with MDMA? The other one says, how do I sign up to become and train to become a MAPS psychedelic integration therapist? And the other one is any update on need for MD or a psychologist as part of a therapist team, which I think you already touched on there.
Yeah, well, what's happened for the Bronx VA study is that the FDA has now said to us that if you have a doctor in the building, the lead person doesn't need to be MD, Ph.D. So that's sort of good, but we want to knock out this idea of the doctor in the building. But they've basically admitted that there's no real reason to have a doctor or a PhD as the lead person. But they've not formally yielded on that, and they've got this deal that you have to have a doctor in the building. So we still got our work to do to get rid of that. The other point is that the second person, the first person of the two team, will need to be licensed as a therapist, but you can be a social worker, with a clinical social worker, with all that training. The real battle right now is around the second person. And we hope that they will be a student without a license, but they don't necessarily have to be a student. They should be just somebody who's an apprentice, who's interested, who wants to be helpful. So that's a battle still to be fought. But I would say for people that you want to be trained, go to the MAPS website, participate. There's something about the therapist training program under the participate menu item. And then, but the thing is that we are limited in our capacity. And so we're trying to start training people that have a team that can actually implement. And right now it can only be implemented in protocols. So we're trying to train people for Europe. We have a training that's going to be taking place in November that's mostly for Europeans to work on phase 3 and phase 2 in Europe. So if you want to be trained, it's important to try to initially at least get together a team. There need to be a doctor that can be a prescriber. You need a site. And we lay this all out on the website. And so I think that's going to be an important resource for people. We've been given permission for 50 people for expanded access. And we're just hoping to start in the next month or two, the first site, and then over the next couple of months, the others, again, COVID permitting. And so we hope that near the end of next year, we'll be able to go back to FDA and say, here's the data from 35 to 50 people. Now give us permission for another 100 people for expanded access, in which case we're going to open up a bunch more sites. So that's when we're really going to want to train more people. Also, we're training people for the eating disorder study. So new projects we can train people. We just did a training for the bunch of people at the Bronx VA. There's a training right now going on that Marcelo Talora and Bruce Poulter are doing in association with Naropa University, which is in Boulder, kind of a Buddhist school, but they're very focused on psychotherapy. So there's a bunch of people that are getting trained there, but more as part of their educational. And some of them we hope will become therapists to work on sites, but we don't have sites for them yet. So I'd say, again, the training is work with yourself, work with your friends. Do sign up to get the MAPS training. The Zendo training is really important. It's kind of similar principles in a lot shorter time. So that's something to consider. But I'm really glad for the question, because the main challenge for scaling is going to be getting enough therapists. And so we're really thinking a lot about how do we expand our therapy training program.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. So as you can see, the sun has gone down here, and I know it's like almost 9:30 p.m. where you are there. So we're almost at time, but I was wondering if you had some final words that you wanted to give everyone here tonight before we start our close.
Yeah. Well, first off, MAPS, could use support. So we're trying to build up our membership. So I'd like to encourage people to think about becoming a member of MAPS, and then you can get the mailed bulletin and things like that. Most of what we do is for free. Even the bulletin goes up for free on the website. But if you want to help us out, we did raise $30 million, but none of that is for MAPS. Actually, all of that is for the research. So it doesn't cover any of our operational costs. So that is. But the other thing I would say is that it's really incumbent upon all of us to make sure that the psychedelic renaissance continues to flourish, and learn as much as you can. Be an educated person. Come out with others about your own experiences, good or bad, and just build kind of a cultural container that is more open to this than we've had in the past. Another big thing, I think, is teach your children. I still have friends that hide the fact they smoke pot from their kids. It's just outrageous. And it's sad, that in your relationship with your own children, you don't feel like you can be open because cultural pressures or things like that. So I'd say we all have opportunities in our lives to contribute to expanding and supporting the psychedelic renaissance. And so just look for ways to do that. And then I think we've got a real good chance that this will turn out well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Rick. It's always a pleasure to chat with you and hear what you have to say and see all of the amazing things that MAPS is doing and that you started. So thank you so much for being here and for being such a great leader in this renaissance and doing everything that you do. Yeah, I know we all appreciate you so much.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure, and thank you for creating this opportunity for us to share all this information with people.
Okay. Absolutely. And hopefully we'll see you again soon. So just before I close off, I would like to give another big thank you to founder of MAPS, Rick Doblin, who we know is the leader of this amazing organization since its formation. And none of us would be here without you, Rick. So thank you so much for all of your passion and leading this organization forward. So before we like to close, I would like to invite someone on screen. He is a professor of philosophy from the University of Winnipeg, Neil Mcarthur, and he is with the sponsor of this episode, Enhanced Therapy Institute. So they will be running a one-day conference on Saturday, November 7th. And Neil is just going to give us a few words about that. So as our tech team is working in the background on getting him on screen, I'm just going to say a few more words about our volunteers. So as you know, we have a huge volunteer team that's working on the webinar series, from PR to marketing to tech, as you can see. We have so many people who are helping out, and we just want to give a huge thank you to them as well. So it looks like we have Neil here. Welcome.
Well, thanks so much, Shannon. This is a really fascinating session. I was really happy to have listened in. So I just wanted, my name is Neil Mcarthur. I'm from the Center for Professional Applied Ethics at the University of Manitoba. I'm an ethicist, so I'm not a practitioner, I'm not a therapist, but in conjunction with the therapist, Derek Darva, I'm running a conference specifically focused on ethical questions around the therapeutic use of MDMA and other psychedelics. So we wanted to kind of take a little bit more of a specific take that will be, less about, some of these really important practical issues, and try to focus in on some of the ethical and legal issues. And so our conference is, I'm just going to look at my website so I make sure I get all the details right. But it's on November 7th. It's an all-day conference. We are charging $35 just for registration. But if anyone is unwaged or a student or would otherwise feel they can't afford that $35, we're more than happy to waive it for people who request it. Where our main concern is just to have people who are interested in exploring the ethical sides of these issues, and we have a really great lineup of speakers. Our website is enhancedtherapy.ca. You can see the full lineup and all the details for the conference. Rick will be speaking, and lots of other people. So that would be really great if people are interested in that, and I would really look forward to seeing some of you there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Neil. And the link is right in the chat there if you guys would like to check that out.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Right. Thank you.
And that's
thanks
on
so
November 7th. Yeah, no problem.
7th.
So thanks so much for joining us here. And thank you so much to Enhanced Therapy Institute for sponsoring this episode. And we look forward to the conference on the 7th.
Thanks.
So a few other important updates before we close here today. I just want to give a special thank you to all of the speakers in the series, and most importantly, a special thank you to all of you for joining us again for the series. As you know, all episodes are recorded, so all you have to do is log into your Crowdcast and you'll be able to watch any episode that you miss. And if you want to rewatch them over and over, you can do that as well. So those of you with tickets to season 1, you can log back into season 1 and rewatch those as well. So up and coming, our next episode will take place on September 29th with Dennis McKenna, Leanna Standish, and Victoria Hale. They will be speaking on ayahuasca-assisted psychotherapy in America. Now, just a note, and we're going to send out an email about this, due to the presidential debate, we will be moving this episode to go live at 3 p.m. PST that day instead of the regular 5 p.m. PST, so that all can tune in live to the debate at 6 p.m. if they would like. Also, just a reminder, that episode will be recorded, so if you can't make it at the 3 p.m. PST time, then you'll definitely be able to log back in and watch it. And that's a one-time only thing due to the debate. One other thing I want to make aware before we end the episode here today is a few of our speakers will be hosting semi-private, about 6 to 8 people sessions after their webinar episodes. These sessions will be 1 hour in length in an intimate Zoom call. So you will be able to see and talk to the speaker in a semi-private conversation, and they will also be able to see you. There's limited availability for these sessions, and they're going to sell it fast. So the link to view the different sessions is going to pop up in the chat. And if you would like to take a look at those, you can definitely check those out. So we have many different options, from an intimate Q&A with Paul Stamets, an integration and meditation with Sensei Kevin Simpson. We also have Dr. Joe Tafur talking about the Shipibo Ikaros, and also some amazing workshops put on by our visionary artists. So make sure and check those out. And if you sign up today, you can use the code MAPS exclusive, and you'll receive 25% off the sessions until midnight tonight. So those are all of the updates, and thank you again to our episode sponsor, Enhanced Therapy Institute, and make sure and check out their conference on November 7th. And a very big special thank you to Rick Doblin for being our special guest today. So those are all the updates, and thank you for joining us for our very first episode in season 2. We will see you next week. Bye for now.